I'm Cherylanne Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 332 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. And today we are talking about how to discover your time orientation, embracing time rigidity or time fluidity. I mean, someday, y'all, I am going to learn how to just not have these titles and concepts be a complete mouthful, but that is what you get when you are dealing with a host like me who is a total word nerd. So thanks for bearing with me as I invent these terms. I am really, really delighted to share this concept with you today. This is a concept that I originally introduced to the podcast and to our coaching community back in 2019. And I have to tell you that is one that comes up here 5 years later regularly among women who were a part of this community and this audience that far back. So knowing how many new people have arrived in the Brilliant Balance community as podcast listeners or people who get our newsletter list or people who are in the coaching community, I think it's time to bring this concept back to the forefront, no pun intended, since we are talking all about time orientation today. So this was a concept that I found myself coaching on 5 years ago and decided, okay, I really want to get this into a podcast episode. And then it sort of blew up. It was a very powerful shift, particularly for half of the listening audience. And I'll leave you to guess for a minute which half, time rigid or time fluid, were more affected by this realization. Now, when I look at it 5 years later, I actually think both groups need to be equally influenced. There is great power in understanding people who are wired differently than we are as it relates to our time orientation. I think we can create a lot of patience, a lot of compassion, a lot of understanding by really thinking about this in a slightly different way. So what I want to do today is reshare the original episode with you from back in 2019 and give it, a fresh audience's opportunity to hear how this may affect your life. So interestingly, if you think about the last few episodes, if you're a regular listener, in episode 330, we talked about the importance of moving from learning to doing, right? Making that shift from learning to doing. And I think that one of these audiences of people sometimes has a more difficult time making that shift. Second, in episode 331, we talked about you're not doing it wrong. It's actually just that hard, right? And we were talking about how many things in life, we think are going to be so easy, but it turns out that they are not. They are complicated and they require consistency and they require effort for us to make a shift maybe in how we approach them to find a little bit of ease. And this episode actually may be the unlocking to some of why you're stuck not moving into taking action or why things are feeling so hard. And so I think it's a very powerful concept and one that I am really kind of happy to be sharing with you again today. So without further ado, this is Discover Your Time Orientation, Embracing Time Rigidity or Time Fluidity. I am so excited about today's topic because this came up in a Wednesday call with my coaching group. And I love it when topics are sort of birthed out of the women who I'm coaching. And I can tell that it resonates with them, and then I get to share it with you. So I love it when that happens. And this is definitely one of those episodes. We were in a Wednesday call with my Breakthrough group. And Breakthrough is the coaching program, the biggest coaching program that I run for women. So we have a group call every Wednesday as part of that process. And it's a Q&A format. And someone was asking about our weekly planning process, which is a central part of Breakthrough. We have kind of a unique take on how to build a plan for the week. And she said, I was really focused this week on trying to be everywhere on time. That's not normal for me. I don't usually run on time, but I was really focused this week on wanting to arrive everywhere on time for my meetings and my appointments. And I did it, but I felt like a robot. It wasn't as satisfying as I expected it to be. And I think everyone on the call probably thought I was going to tell her, well, listen, here's how you get it together. And, you got to tough it out and get better at this. And that wasn't really my response, because something about the way she asked the question gave me a clue that there may be more to this story, and that maybe something about her wiring needed to handle this weekly planning process a little bit differently. Okay. So let me ask you, as you're listening to this, are you someone who likes to live by a schedule? Is that like a natural, easy way for you to operate? Or in contrast, are you someone who prefers to let the day sort of take shape as it comes, hour by hour? Most people can put themselves into one of those two camps, and the answer may be a clue about whether you are inherently time rigid or time fluid. And knowing which one describes you can really be quite powerful. It certainly was for this woman in the coaching call. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to break down the differences between these two orientations to time and give you a really important nuance in how you would build a plan for, your day or your week based on this. Okay? So first, I want to talk about what is it if you are time fluid. So when you're time fluid, you are somebody who probably likes to do lots of things at once, instinctively, right? This is just like, you might fight this, but if in your nature, that's what would be the most comfortable. You're probably very relationship oriented. You get lost in the moment, and you wouldn't want to shut down a conversation just to get to your next appointment. That would feel rude or distasteful to you. And if you really like flexibility and spontaneity, and you really value freedom, right, as a core principle, you just want to be unshackled, you're probably time fluid, okay? When you're time fluid, you feel best, very best. You're at the top of your game when there's room in your life for the unexpected, right? Conversely, if you feel restricted by too much structure, and you feel really frustrated if someone is rushing you, if they're saying, hey, it's time to go, we're supposed to be there in 10 minutes, or hey, can you wrap that up? I need you to finish this or we're not going to be on time. If that's frustrating to you when those conversations happen, then you are probably time fluid by nature. There are certain cultures in the world that are predisposed to being time fluid. The Latin American cultures, as an example, are time fluid. So things sort of happen when they happen, right? Italy is a place where it's very time fluid. Not uncommon for a shop owner to close and be like, I'll be back this afternoon, but maybe not exactly at the time I said I would be, right? There's a fluidity to their relationship with time. They're sort of time-ish, right? I'll be there at 2-ish or 8-ish. So this wiring of being time fluid is not very American. Our culture in America really values and praises and lauds people who are good at being time rigid. Okay, so let's talk about what time rigid looks like and feels like. By the way, everything except the name, because to me the word fluid is so appealing and rigid is nobody wants to be rigid. And yet in our culture, we really revere and respect people who are more time rigid. So, if you like to have things in order, right? You like to do things in a predictable order, or you instinctively are someone who builds schedules. You just can't help yourself. You're going to turn your day into a schedule. And you're probably linear. You do things in an order, one after the other, first A, then B, then C. And your brain kind of works that way, right? You see things as first I'll do A, then I'll do B, then I'll do C. Those are signals or symptoms of being time rigid. People who are time rigid are the ones who keep the trains running on time, right? They arrive on time, they depart on time, they show up for meetings and for theater performances and dinner reservations on time, and they take it quite seriously, right? Time rigid people are the ones who check their watches and watch the clock. And we tend to be task oriented when we're time rigid. So we want to get this task done, complete it, and move on. So the relationship is not necessarily the driver. In other words, if you think about my earlier example, someone who's time fluid, when they're in a conversation, they'll get lost in that moment and they don't want to shut it down. Someone who's time rigid is saying, okay, we're going to need to wrap this up and move on. If you are time rigid, you'll find that you really like and you crave structure. You crave order, right? And the most comfortable environment is like a predictable environment, one where you know what's going to happen next. In fact, you might not even like surprises if you're time rigid in general. Like you might not like surprises in general. And you really like timeliness when you know when things are going to happen. You know at noon we're going to have lunch, at 6 we're going to have dinner, at 10 we're going to go to bed. That feels very comfortable, right? There's comfort in having structure. And you're really at your best when there is order around you. And so you're frustrated when there's not, right? When people are running late or when there's chaos or when there's not an obvious sequence to things, that's frustrating for someone who's time rigid. Hi, it's Cherylanne. Thanks for listening. Did you know that the ideas I share on this show are things I also can help you implement? If you want me in your corner helping you find more time for what fills you up, go to brilliant-balance.com/schedule and sign up for a free exploratory call. Give yourself this time. You'll be so glad you did. So think about yourself, think about your patterns of behavior. Which one do you identify with? And then also think about the people closest to you, your spouse or your partner, a child, a parent, a key colleague, your boss, right? Think about those people and ask yourself, oh, I wonder what they are. And I bet you can tell just based on this description. So why does that matter? Well, because this dichotomy, whether you are time fluid or time rigid, and if you're really far on the spectrum in either direction, this can be a deep source of conflict, right? We are all in relationships with some people who are our opposites as it relates to time, and it really causes conflict. And there are two kind of important levels of conflict that go beyond just like the level of annoyance, right? So it can be annoying to someone who's time fluid when their partner is saying, God, we have to go, we're going to be late, get in the car. That's annoying, but it's not a core conflict, okay? And vice versa, it can be annoying to someone who's time rigid when that time fluid person is keeping them from arriving on time or departing on time. That's at the level of annoyance. What I want to talk about here in conflict is where it gets serious, okay? And it gets serious in two places at least. Time rigid people feel like they can't count on people who are time fluid. So it becomes an issue of integrity. It becomes an issue of trust, right? I can't count on you to be where you said you would be when you said you would be there, or to have this thing done when you said you would have it done. Now that is a much deeper, more painful source of conflict for both people involved. And here's the other side of it. Time fluid people feel shut down by time rigid people. So you're in a conversation and the time rigid person is like, well, that's been nice talking to you. I got to go. And you're just warming up, right? You're just getting started. So you might be in a meeting trying to make an impassioned point and you will feel not heard, right? You will feel shut down by the person who is trying to advance the meeting to the next agenda point. So those two things, having someone tell you, I can't count on you, or having someone tell you, I feel like you shut me down all the time. That is a deep level of conflict. That's a painful level of conflict, goes well beyond annoyance. So being aware of both your own natural predisposition, right, to one or the other, and to people close to you, and again, whether they're colleagues or family members or friends, can really help you stay out of, hornets' nests of conflict. Because just being aware of their predisposition gives you the opportunity to honor it, to create a little bit more space, to understand that the intent may be absolutely innocuous, right? But the feeling can still be painful. And I'll tell you that I one of the things I want to kind of circle this back to is, what do you do about it in the context of planning? Because the question in our group in Breakthrough arose when it was like, I tried all week to really stay on time and I did it, but it didn't feel good. It felt robotic. So when you're building a plan and you are a time fluid person living in a time rigid culture, which is, if you are in America and you are working in a corporation, I promise you, that's the situation you're in, right? You're living in a time rigid culture. And if you're wired to be time fluid, it can be painful. You can feel like you envy the productivity of the time rigid people. Like they seem to have these plans and they stick with them. So the answer is you build a looser plan structure. I think of it as like you play connect the dots. So maybe you have 3 big touchstones in your day, max, maybe 4. And you have to get from each of those touchstones to the next, but you can get there any way you choose, right? So you have a few time-stamped activities that need to be done at a certain time, but then in between you can kind of meander. And the way you meander is you work with like a parking lot of things you could do, but then you get to spontaneously put them into whatever order you choose. All right, a time rigid person would not want to do that. A time rigid person is like, I can build my day in 15-minute increments and feel deeply satisfied by that. But if you're time fluid, you want to work with bigger brush strokes, right? Connect the dots, a couple of key meetings. So when you're structuring a day or structuring a week, don't overly pack it, or you will feel hamstrung by that structure. You really want to honor your need for flow. And the only way to do that is to underplan, undershoot the day so that you can leave white space. And that will allow some things to run over without creating a domino effect. Okay, so if you are time fluid and you are trying to pack your day with back-to-back-to-back meetings, you are in chronic frustration. Because as soon as you allow one meeting to run long so you can stay in the moment, you have a domino effect that will not end until the day is over, right? And then it sometimes carries over to the following day. So this really is the answer, is trying to give yourself space to paint with a broader brushstroke. Just get those connect the dots elements on your calendar and give yourself space to move between them with a higher level of fluidity. Okay? I hope this is a helpful context. I know it was helpful to our group. I hope it's been helpful to you, especially if you recognize yourself as being time fluid. I think it can really help give you some freedom to move and also help you honor who you really are so that you can live within that. And you'll just feel a much greater level of satisfaction with your life when you do. Okay, thank you for listening to this rebroadcast. Remember, if you are catching this episode for the first time, this concept originally aired back in 2019. I'm bringing it back to the forefront in 2024 with fresh perspective. And one of the things that I will say might be sparking for you, because 5 years later, the conversation around ADD and ADHD is really much more resonant than it would have been 5 years ago. And so as a kind of a button on this episode, I just want to say that if you are somebody who has gotten an adult diagnosis of ADD, or if you have a child who's being evaluated for or who is getting support for ADD behavior patterns, you may notice the correlation between time fluidity and ADD. And I don't think that's accidental. I think it is one of the hallmark attributes of that particular diagnosis. But even if you don't have the diagnosis, you may recognize a tendency in this direction. So I just want to remind you one last time, like, if you know that you are somebody who is really more time fluid, that's where you're comfortable, that's how you're wired, it is counterculture, in particularly American culture, to live with a time fluid orientation toward time. And so I just wanted you to be gentle with yourself, really honor the great power that comes with that particular orientation, and also have a little patience with those of us on the time rigid side of the continuum. And then vice versa, if you are somebody who's like, oh my gosh, this is it. I'm time rigid. That is, culturally acceptable and relevant, particularly again in American culture. And this might explain some of my frustration with colleagues or family members who are more time fluid. I hope it opens up a little bit of compassion and patience as we try to find our way through how we navigate a world that we see things differently. So important in so many different aspects of our lives. So thanks for tuning in today. That's all I have for you in this episode. Till next time, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.